Hey everybody, this is Laird of Garskcotton, and this is going to be a response to the Veritas 48 challenge, which is challenging his proposition that God exists. In his first video, um, it's like Facts of Normativity, something like that. Anyway, anyone who knows me very well will know that I've done this before with Mike Campochiaro. This could very easily turn into a very long video. In fact, I just did a take of this where I went through all of this and just did a rough take right off the bat, not knowing how long it would take. It took me 50 minutes. But I'm trying to do this again to kind of make it go down. Make it go down, you know, get my argument down. All right. Veritas 48. Explain to me if tell me if if I'm missing something. I'm just going to go through this whole thing. This is basically what a summary of your argument in my own words. You say states of mind are different and they are measured by reason. States of mind, those are your words.
It's 3 o'clock.
Thanks, Vicky. 3 o'clock in the morning, that's what time it is. You define normative fact as what ought to be the case. And by the way, I really admire and thank you very much for simplifying everything down to oughts and ises. That was very cool and makes it very easy to follow. Very nice. Thank you. You then go on to say that there are two branches, ethics and rationality. With ethics, you have obligations or basically a moral ought, and when you violate that ought, it's immoral. And with rationality, you have a rational ought, and when you violate that ought, then it becomes irrational. You also go on to say that you have to agree that you can agree or disagree with. I can agree or disagree with you. That if I agree with you, then that means that states of mind are measured by reason. Essentially, that means that there's a continuum of reasoning. You know, if we were to visualize this mathematically, I drew this on my previous take. You have 0 and then and then 1 on a real line. That means you have different degrees of reasonability according to if I agree with you. That means this state of mind is more reasonable than this state of mind, which is slightly less reasonable. And if you disagreed with the claim that states of mind can be measured on a continuum of reason, that there are, you know, like the 0 to 1, if you disagree, then that means all states of mind are equally reasonable. That means that the young earth creationist is equally reasonable to the scientist, and that means, essentially, if I disagreed with your claim that the states of mind can be measured on a continuum of reason, if I disagreed with you, then that means that young earth creationist is just as reasonable as a scientist, and when I say that, that means that your argument is sustained. That means that you're being reasonable. You're in a reasonable state of mind because I disagreed with you. Okay? Going on, you give an example for if you have the old earth theory, given certain pieces of strong evidence, if the evidence is strong, to not draw that conclusion would violate the rational ought. In other words, it would be irrational to disagree with the argument because the evidence is strong. You go on to say, you cannot get what ought to be the case from what merely is the case. This part I was a bit confused by this, but you say you cannot get what ought. You cannot get an ought from what is. Okay, I'll take that as kind of a claim that you make, that an ought cannot come from an is. All right. You make another claim. What you have as an atheist, I'm assuming, what you have as an atheist is a state of what merely is the case, not what ought to be the case. So that you're saying that atheists only have what is, and they don't have the oughts. And I think you were talking about rationality here. Um, you are saying that there is a difference between the ought and the is. But you said that the ought in rationality is being rational, whereas the atheist claims that they only see what is. These are states of mind. So here, I think this is where you start confusing things a little bit, because isn't the ought for rationality, isn't that stating what is with the state of mind? You know, isn't the ought also the is for rationality? Yeah. I think what you're trying to say here, since you did state ethics and rationality, is that the atheist only has the rational ought, which is the stating what merely is. Just saying, yeah, that is, period. The state of mind of naming what merely is, that is the rational ought. But the ethical ought, they don't have that. They don't have the ethical ought, because they only have the rational ought. And the rational ought does not lead to the ethical ought. I'm trying to make sense of your argument. Because really, an atheist would say that what merely is the case, that's being rational. You're like, that is. And you can make claims from that. That's basically what empiricism is. You start with what you can measure. This is what most atheists will say. You start with what you can measure, and you build a case from that. You use statistics, like you say later on. You use statistics, you build an argument, good database, you establish a degree of error, and you have science at that point. So you start with what merely is. You observe. That's what empiricism is. And then you use rationality from that what is. So I think what you're saying is that atheists only have rational ought, not ethical ought. All right? And I'm probably being unfair here. I think, but I'll get into that. I'll get into that. I'm trying to throw you a bone here, making sense of what you're saying here. Okay, you go on to say, if you admit that there are oughts in both ethics and rationality, then atheism is essentially contradicted, because it is only about a state of what is, which you go on to say, which you go on to call normative impotency. Okay, here's what I'm getting from that. I'm saying you're basically saying that atheism believes that there are moral oughts, but like atheists believe that there are moral oughts, but atheism is grounded only in rational oughts, which I think what you're trying to say actually is empiricism. When you say merely is, I think you're trying to say empiricism. Atheists only believe in empiricism, which is what they would call a rational ought, and that is not a moral ought. So, atheists believe that there are moral oughts, but atheism basically does not make the claim that there are moral oughts. So, there's a contradiction. Atheists believe it, but atheism doesn't. That's the contradiction you're claiming, and you call that normative impotency, normative fact being what ought to be the case, the ought, the should, the moral, this is the way it should be, normative thing. Okay,